I send greetings to the attendees of the 2022 African-American Historical and Genealogical Society Convention. I am William O. Ritchie, Jr., the current president of the District of Columbia Sons of the American Revolution, SAR. Reportedly, I am the first African-American state-level society president in the 133-year history of the SAR. Never did I imagine while growing up in the hills of Beckley, West Virginia during the 1960s, attending a segregated elementary and high school, that one day I would be able to prove that my fifth great-grandfather, William Parks, was shot, killed, and scalped by Indians collaborating with the British in the Commonwealth of Virginia during May of 1776. I have chronicled my journey from Beckley to my attendance at the capstone of Black education at Howard University, earning an athletic scholarship and becoming the university's first known NCAA All-American in track and field, and the university's first NCAA sprint champion in 1969. In 1968, I qualified to go through the Olympic trials qualification. I was a secondary participant during the widely publicized March 1968 takeover of the university's administration building that forced the establishment of a more African-American centered educational curriculum. 2 weeks later, I witnessed the turmoil and anger on the campus after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The next phase of my journey was joining the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, an interesting career choice as a Howard University graduate. Changes were required in the law enforcement profession, and I made the decision to try to effect change from within instead of throwing rocks from the outside. I eventually achieved the rank of Deputy Chief, retiring in 1999, holding the position of Chief of Detectives in the most powerful city in the world. I became a homicide expert, having served several tours at different ranks within the homicide branch, including that of commanding officer. I had investigative oversight during the assassination attempt of former President Ronald Reagan and the Air Florida plane crash during the early 1980s. Post-retirement, I have often been called upon by both local and national media to discuss high-profile death and dying-related cases. I retired from the police department to become the first director, the Office of Decedent Affairs at the Washington Hospital Center. This Office of Family Advocates primarily consisted of former homicide detectives and one kidney transplant recipient, was established to assist the families of patients who died in the hospital to address a range of death and dying-related issues. One was to increase consents for organ and tissue donation from the family of deceased patients. In our first year, consents for donation increased by 300%. The program was highlighted in medical journals and covered by media outlets around the world. I was invited by an international organ donation society to travel to the Netherlands to give a presentation on our unique program at their conference, a trip I thoroughly enjoyed. During this period, I also volunteered and became a member of the board of directors of the National Kidney Foundation, the National Capital Area, and the Greater Washington Urban League. I had the good fortune to plan a wedding at the hospital for a kidney transplant recipient that was shown all around the world by CNN and featured in a 6-page article in Jet magazine during 1996. Another aspect of my life journey involves family interactions. Branches of my family have held biennial reunions since the early 1970s. I was a contributor to our first family history book entitled The Virginia Kaleidoscope, that was authored by several of my cousins. This publication is currently in the African American History section at the Library of Congress and is on the shelves in the Daughters of the American Revolution DAR Library in Washington, D.C. A significant amount of our specific family history in the book is based on oral history, especially information prior to 1860, when the history of people of color was not generally recorded. The book contains the names of more than 5,500 family members. During 2011, I decided I wanted to try to validate some of the oral history in the VK, utilizing DNA and building family trees. I submitted not only my DNA sample, but also samples from other members of my family, including my sister. The results were astonishingly revealing that included matches with 5 adoptees that I eventually assisted with identifying their birth parents. One lady had been searching for 35 years. Some of those areas of the VK that were based on oral history were validated. One of the most life-altering involved a distant cousin DNA match that my sister had with Jean, an elderly white woman who was a descendant of slave owners. Jean was a former regent within the Daughters of the American Revolution. Jean, who is now 94 years old, and I became very close over a short period. Jean insisted that I join the Sons of the American Revolution, an idea that was met with a negative reaction on my part based on limited knowledge that I had of such legacy organizations and my recall of the Daughters of the American Revolution refusal to allow Marian Anderson to perform at Constitution Hall back in the 1930s. I subsequently agreed to submit an application to SAR after Jean networked me with the organization. On July 4th, 2016, I was inducted as a member of the DC Sons of the American Revolution. I was subsequently able to identify 16 additional Revolutionary War patriots, including one woman with the help of one of our society genealogists. After what I considered to be an unbelievably short period, I was placed on the Society's Board of Management and became the Public Information Officer during June of 2017. I was later elected to the position of Second Vice President, Senior Vice President, and installed as President during April of this year. By all known accounts, I became the first African-American president to hold this state-level position. My memoir, A Black Man's Journey to the Sons of the American Revolution, was published during the summer of 2021. This is that book, and it's pretty thick with a lot of information. 100% of the proceeds were directed to 3 501c3 organizations, including my alma mater, Howard University. Several checks have been written to date to these organizations. Jean actually wrote one of the forewords for my book. All the 17 Revolutionary War patriots that I have identified to date are white. I continue my search to attempt to identify one of color. 2 of my patriots were identified after I found my second great grandfather's death certificate that listed his slave owner as his father. This official document was one of the proof documents that I was able to submit for these 2 patriots. Other research documents used including tax records, land records, wills, slave census reports, and family Bibles. I included the proof and patriotic service documents for each of my patriots in my memoir. It was a very interesting experience writing the book. Fortunately, I was able to keep a lot of historical documents going back to the 1960s that I was able to use to validate a lot of the information that I have in the book. Thank you for allowing me to share with you my journey, and I hope that journeys that you may pursue are as productive.